Welcome to Amaka Intellectual Factory, where I host podcasts and many other interesting stuff. In this video, I would be narrating an article I recently wrote titled Cassia Spy Ring: Those Who Have a Problem with President Trump Being a Billionaire and His Billionaire Friends. I would also be publishing the article on my website shortly after this video.
The way Trump has pretty much brought his billionaire friends into politics is this like, yo, we are literally going to set this thing up to where we are rich beyond belief. And if there was a 1%, it's going to be a 0.5% because we about to get so rich when I get out of here.
We could be heading towards that. Having that much outsider influence on a presidency, I think is bad anyways. I'm going to say it should be banned. I don't agree with the whole lobbying practice and being able to buy a politician because who are you working for? Are you working for the American people are essentially your employer, the guy who paid you? I don't know really who's in charge. I mean, I get it. You have to align yourself with the right people, smart people. At some points in time, it feels like these billionaire friends of his may have a little bit too much overreach and too much power. And the American people, as far as I remember, never voted for like these billionaire guys. They voted for this guy because of his ideas and what he had, in store for the betterment of the nation. And instead you get billionaire 1, 2, and 3 who are making the decisions and calling the shot.
I have lost count of the number of videos I have come across online where Trump's detractors criticize him solely for having billionaire friends. Their criticism gets even harsher with Elon Musk, who was appointed by President Trump to head the newly created Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. A lot of their arguments are tainted with socialist and communist ideologies, where successful businessmen and women are demonized. They do not believe that billionaires could actually care. Rather, they see billionaires or even just regular wealthy people as greedy people who only want to accumulate more wealth and turn the general masses into slaves. The problem with this belief is that it fails to differentiate wealthy people from shadow people with nefarious totalitarian agenda, now commonly known as globalists, because they do not respect the boundaries of countries. It is these globalists that want to enslave humanity. They are the ones that push for socialist and communist agenda because socialist and communist ideologies make a people more uniform in their ways of life and thus more willing to submit to a central authority. This socialist or communist ideology hates egalitarians and discourages creativity in people. It therefore makes sense for their demonization of billionaires and wealthy people in general. Also, they fail to take into account how bribing a wealthy politician would be a lot harder than bribing a politician who grew up in poverty or in a lower to middle class family and environment. However, I have some news for people who outrightly condemn wealthy people as being incapable of caring for the general masses of people. I want to give a lot of them a benefit of the doubt of not knowing better and being misled by globalist sympathizers and propaganda. The fact of the matter is that there is actually historical antecedent where a group of very wealthy people whose hearts were touched by the suffering of their countrymen and women due to an invasion came together to rescue their nation from this tyranny. I am referring to the little-known story now called the Cassia Spy Ring.
Wow, that's fantastic. I can't believe I haven't read this one yet, honestly, because I've read several books about OSS, and now I definitely want to pick it up. So this was about the Cassia spy ring. Then can you tell me a little bit about it? Because I just read a blurb so far, but I know very few details about it, honestly, and probably nobody knows the subject better than you do.
Yeah. So the Cassia spy ring's a fascinating thing in that it was a group of Austrians who independently got together after Austria was annexed by the Third Reich. And they said, and these were all people who had great lives. They were not going to be adversely affected by the annexation into the Reich and by the coming war, but this weighed heavily on them, their morals and their conscience, and they slowly sort of coalesced into first a group of like-minded people who opposed what Hitler was suggesting and what he was doing already in the East, and then said, that's not enough. We have to do more. We have to use our access, and we've got to figure out a way to collect this information and get it into the hands of the Western allies. And so that's what they did. And they sent emissaries who could travel out of the Reich for legal purposes, for business. And those people eventually made contact with first the British, and eventually they found the OSS. Actually, they found Alan Dulles, who would, in the post-war years, become the longest-serving director of the CIA. Mm-hmm. He was posted as the chief of OSS in Bern, Switzerland. And they found him, and eventually, for a variety of reasons, they transferred sort of operational control to the OSS office in Istanbul. It was easier for them to get in and out of Istanbul because it was a sort of a Casablanca kind of a place. Everybody was trading, doing backroom deals, and spies were everywhere. So it was very easy for them to get lost in the mix there. And they had reasons for going there too, sort of cover, what we would call cover for action reasons, business reasons. But that's where the problem started, actually, is when OSS was sort of the people who were in charge of the operation in Istanbul, not Alan Dulles and Bern, were sort of ingenuous, naive, and not very well schooled in intelligence. They had learned a little bit from the British and been certified to go into the field, but they really didn't understand the complicated business of doing this kind of espionage, very dangerous work, sending people behind the lines to a police state to collect intelligence. Mm-hmm. And so, it was just a matter of time before the security services of the Reich smelled a rat and started infiltrating this network that had been built, of which Cassia was a part. So there was no compartmentalization. All the rules that people learn as they're becoming young spies, all those things were violated. And then they decided to strike at one point. And that's when they organized some sting operations and started scooping up members of the Cassia spy ring. So it was a tale of daring do, for sure, great bravery. It was a success. They collected on some of the most important intelligence of World War II, but it was also this catastrophic, failure, also intelligence failure. So kind of for all those reasons, it makes an interesting case study for people who are interested in intelligence. But it's also one of, it talks about how serious the consequences are. I think people who get into the business I used to be in sometimes forget about the risks that other people are taking. We manage risk, and believe it or not, if you do this kind of work, run operations year after year, it starts to become sort of second nature. Sometimes you forget the grave risks that other people are taking.
The story of the Cassia spy ring is brought to us by Kit Turner, apparently the only author who has published a well-investigated book on the Cassia spy ring. It is a truly dark story about how a group of very wealthy Austrians came together after Austria was annexed by the Third Reich, basically after the Nazi invasion of Austria. These were very wealthy people, probably even billionaires, who would not have been adversely affected by the Nazi invasion of Austria. But their conscience would not let them look away from the suffering that regular Austrians endured under the Nazi. So after a series of intellectual banters, they decided to pool their resources together and do something about their current situation. They sought partnership with their Western allies, the British and the United States. One thing led to another, and the Cassia spy ring was formed. Long story short, obviously they were not successful, otherwise they would be a major mention in the history of World War II. My concluding thoughts. The point of mentioning the story of the Cassia spy ring is to show people that it is possible for a group of wealthy individuals to come together and do something to stop their country from heading in the wrong direction. While these people were not successful, it does not mean subsequent attempts by wealthy individuals coming together to save their nation will not succeed. The beautiful thing about history is that we can learn from the mistakes of other people. So just because these wealthy individuals were not successful during World War II does not mean a subsequent attempt will not succeed. To finally conclude my point, I am strongly of the opinion that it is only a person, preferably a group of people, who can afford to lose a ginormous amount of money and resources that are capable of fighting this alarming growth of the globalist agenda. The end of my article. Of course, as usual, and as always, you are more than welcome to comment down below. Well, that's all I have to say for now. Until next time, take care of your lovely selves. And remember, life is beautiful and worth living.